So if you haven't taken the poll yet, please go ahead and fill out the poll while we're waiting. Just gonna get a few more people on the line that we're expecting, and we'll start in a couple of minutes. All right, I guess we'll go ahead and get started here. We'll give our survey another minute or two to wrap up. Hope everybody's doing okay today for our latest installment with Lunch with NEMA. So I'm going to go ahead and end the voting here, and I'm going to share the results and show everybody what we've done here. So we've got a lot of folks who have done it quite a bit, defining themselves as old pros. We've got a few folks 3 to 10 times, and then a few newcomers as well. So that's terrific. So we're going to get started with the presentation, and Dan Yaeger here, and I just wanted to let you know that I'm totally delighted to be here with you today, and I want to thank you for joining us for another installment with Lunch with NEMA. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. First of all, I'll be giving a presentation for the first part of the hour, and since I can't see you sitting here, raising your hand or whatever, make sure you ask questions and make comments by using the chat box on your screen. BJ and Sarah will serve as the chat moderators, and after I'm through with the presentation, we'll cover your questions and hopefully provide some good answers to you. Second, I want to let you know that we're recording this session, and we'll have it available on the NEMA website in a few days, so you can listen again and again if you really want me to feel important. So there you go. Presenting with power. Boy, I could have used this workshop when I was starting out. I'll never forget my early days as a speaker. I was absolutely terrible. I remember breaking out in a cold sweat, my hands trembling as I fumbled around with my notes, losing my place, constantly saying and you know, pretty much trying my hardest to be the worst speaker ever in history. And then I got religion. I started reading up on public speaking and even took a few classes, and after lots of practice I got better and better. And I'm really glad I did, because now I know that public speaking is incredibly important to helping you do your job better and boosting your career. I usually hate to make predictions, but I'll tell you something about your future that's rock solid certain. If you aspire to a position of leadership of any kind in your career, somewhere, sometime, somehow, will be required to do some public speaking. It might be a presentation in front of your colleagues or a keynote address in front of hundreds of strangers, but you will be required to utter a few intelligent words before an audience at some point. Public speaking is often a determining factor in your ability to get a job and advance in your career. Good speakers are recognized as confident leaders, able to articulate their museum's mission, respected for their knowledge and their ability to inspire. Plus, presentations form the backbone of NEMA programming at our annual conference, at workshops, and webinars like these. I know many of you with us today are scheduled to speak at the upcoming NEMA conference in Newport, and I'd like to give a special shout out to all of you. Thanks for contributing to our mission, and thanks for committing yourself to make your presentation skills the best they can be. So here's our agenda for the rest of the hour. First, I'll share with you some various thoughts that I've had on presentations in my years of giving them. Then I'm going to go in depth into the importance of preparation, how to organize the content of your presentation, and I'll give you some tips on how to master your delivery as well. After my talk, we'll go through your questions, and you can put me to the test. By the end of the hour, you'll be more confident public speaker and better equipped to whip the crowd into a frenzy of love, adoration, and standing ovations, all right? So before we get rolling, though, let me tell you a little bit about myself. First of all, public speaking is an essential element of my career, and one to which I've committed a lot of time and energy. I've been at NEMA now for a little over 3 years, and I have to say it seems that I've spent most of that time talking in one form or another, preaching the gospel of museums to just about anyone who will listen. Prior to joining NEMA, I was for 7 years the director of the Charles River Museum of Industry and Innovation in Waltham, Massachusetts. And prior to that, I was the operator of Yaeger Communications, a marketing communications firm specializing in destination planning and development, which means that I worked with cities and towns and regions across the U.S. and many museums, too, bringing visitors to their doors. So during the course of my career, I've given hundreds of presentations, including keynote addresses, press conferences, client pitches, elevator speeches, and so forth, as well as teaching at places like Brown and Bentley, Harvard, and Tufts. Now for NEMA, as I said, I'm out on the road quite a bit, and I do things like giving presentations on presentations, like I'm doing here today. So that's my background. So I'd like to get started by sharing a few observations about presenting that I've gathered over the years. First of all, first observation, times have changed. In the old days, presentations were predominantly given by people standing at a podium, reading their academic papers to an audience that was very often physically present but mentally absent, dying from boredom. The very first NEMA conference in 1919, for example, featured as its keynote presentation a paper entitled, get this, Wider Fields for Museum Workers, delivered by Dr. Herman C. Bumpus, president of Tufts College. Now, I'm sure this was very scintillating stuff back in 1919, but it just wouldn't hack it at this year's NEMA conference in Newport. Expectations today are much higher in our fast-paced world. We're a multimedia society weaned on television and the movies, special effects and the internet, immediate gratification, sensory overload, and so forth. In almost every formal presentation today, most of the audience is using a digital device during the speech. Talk about competition. Your speech has to be really good these days. My second observation is that different types of presentations demand different strategies. So you've got your traditional lecture, where the speaker is imparting his or her knowledge to an audience that's presumably there ready to learn. Now here's the speaker. You need to be a master of your material and of your delivery. Your goal is to keep your audience engaged and energized with your words and your stage presence. To be most effective, you have to memorize your talk or have the gift of extemporaneous speaking, or both. With all the political discourse in the air these days, speeches and orations are very popular right now. In speeches and orations, you seek to influence your audience, not just educate them. Your language is lofty and inspiring. From a practical standpoint, speeches are very often read, a job which the teleprompter has made exceedingly easy. Workshops are another form of presentation. They usually contain one or more lectures imparting the speaker's knowledge, along with opportunities for audience participation. Workshops are interactive and hands-on, which greatly increase the impact on the audience. So here's a fun fact. People remember 40% more when they hear something and see something at the same time. The impact increases when they can hear, see, and do something at the same time, like workshops NEMA tries to produce. One interesting presentation format that's come to us recently from Japan is Pachakucha. Anybody out there hear of PK? Pachakucha, which means chit-chat in Japanese, is a worldwide creative phenomenon that showcases fast-paced presentations of 20 slides at 20 seconds each. Now, with this format, the presentations are disciplined, rhythmic, sometimes poetic idea events. NEMA has featured Pachakucha Night the past 2 years at our conference, and we're kicking off this year's conference with a PKN on Tuesday night, November 12th. We're looking for presenters, so check out the details on the NEMA website. Participating in PK is a great way to train yourself as a presenter to be focused and concise, so I really hope you'll consider signing up for our November event. The last type of presentation I'll mention is maybe the hardest of them all, the conference panel. Panel discussions are difficult for several reasons. First, while you may have one or two gifted speakers on the panel, you're also likely to have one or two not so gifted. Stylistically, presenters will have different ways of presenting, which can be a distraction. They may have conflicting motives for speaking. Conference panels rise and fall with the skill of the session chair, who needs to be diplomatic in juggling the strengths of the speakers, focusing their individual presentations into a seamless whole. The chair also acts as the MC of the session, introducing the topic and speakers, facilitating Q&A, and wielding the stopwatch, this is important, with bloodless efficiency. While we see a lot of traditional panel presentations at the NEMA conference, often with 3 presenters and a chair, we also encourage folks to mix it up whenever they can with variations on the panel, such as an interactive debate, a town meeting, or a roundtable format. If you're organizing a panel, we encourage you to limit the number of speakers and be very strict about their time. Don't be afraid that your team won't have enough to say. There will be an entire audience out there with something to contribute to the session too, in the ways of questions and comments and so forth. Now, to some people who have never spoken publicly, good presentations are a sort of black magic almost, a mythical concoction of elements for which the speaker has to sell his or her soul in order to become proficient. This mythology may inhibit folks' desire to get up there on stage. So for the next few minutes, we're going to play a little game of Mythbusters of museum presentations. All right, so here we go. So myth number 1, only extroverts make good presenters. Well, that's a myth. Extroverts are good at socializing, but put them in front of an audience and they can freeze statues just like anyone. That's because extroverts are people who talk in order to think. Introverts are people who think to talk. So it stands to reason that introverts would actually be pretty good at presentation, since preparation is such a key to success. At the very least, presentations level the field between introverts and extroverts. So here's myth number 2. Good presenters are born and not made. Well, while it's true that many people are born with the gift of gab, history is filled with examples of great speakers who put in dedication and hard work to make themselves better presenters. It's not a gift. You have to earn it. As blues master B.B. King says, you have to put in the time to make the dime. All right, here's another one. Good presenters are off the cuff. So how many times have you observed a great speaker who sounds so natural with such an easy delivery that it appears that they're making it up as they go along? Well, the reality is most speakers work hard to make their presentations look natural. For them, it's all practice, practice, practice. But don't take my word for it. Good old Mark Twain once said, it usually takes me 3 weeks to make a good impromptu speech. Okay, and here's the final myth to be busted. The best way to conquer stage fright is to picture your audience naked. Now, who's heard that gem before? I learned it from my 7th drama teacher, which was weird enough to begin with. Then it got weirder. The first time I tried out this misguided technique was in the middle school play, and there in the front row, as I was picturing everyone naked, was my grandmother, my Aunt Dorothy, and my Uncle Al, and so forth. It messed me up for years. So don't try this at home. We'll show you how to really conquer stage fright in a few minutes. So let's talk about what, in my opinion, is probably the most important element in good presentations, and that's preparation. You've all heard the famous Thomas Jefferson quotation that success is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration, right? Well, I believe that success in public speaking is 1% inspiration and 99% preparation. It's the key to a smooth final presentation, no matter what kind of presentation you're giving. So think of your presentation as an iceberg. The presentation itself is just the tip, the part that's exposed to view. But the most substantial part of the presentation is what's only seen by the presenter, the preparation that goes into a successful talk. As you're preparing, you have to ask yourself some key questions. First, you have to know, what's the format? As I said before, there are many different types, and those are going to determine your approach to how you prepare. Second, make sure you know how much time you have. This is absolutely essential. Never, ever overstay your welcome. If you have 20 minutes allotted to you, plan for 14. You'll inevitably go over a bit, and a shorter presentation leaves your audience wanting more instead of suffering from speaker fatigue. Remind yourself why you're participating. What expertise am I supposed to lend? What story am I supposed to tell? Find out who else is participating in the event. This is especially important on a conference panel. It's a sinking feeling, and I've known this a couple of times. It's a sinking feeling to be the last speaker on the panel and realizing that the previous speakers have all stolen your thunder. If you can't review their scripts beforehand or talk with them before the presentation, at least make an educated guess about how they might approach their subject matter so you don't overlap. Make sure you know who else is participating. Make sure you know what the technology is that's available to you or what technology you're expected to use. Do you need a PowerPoint or a Prezi? Do you have audio needs, Wi-Fi for a Skype feed? Make sure you have all of this nailed down well in advance, and make sure you have the expertise to use the technology correctly. Of course, make sure you know the audience and tailor your talk to them as much as possible. At the NEMA conference, of course, your audience will be museum professionals, but it's good to have a sense ahead of time about whether they're newcomers to the field or veterans, art museums or history or science museums or whatever. Unless the audience pre-registers for your event, it's unlikely you'll know these facts ahead of time, but you can take an educated guess based on your subject matter, perhaps. Find out what time of day your presentation is going to be. Different time slots can determine your presentation strategy. For example, the audience has its highest attention usually mid-morning and mid-afternoon. You may need to amp up your energy level a bit for early morning sessions, just after lunch when they're drowsy from eating, and at the end of the day when you're the one standing between the audience and happy hour. So keep that in mind when your time slot is. So let me spend a couple of minutes on the main elements of preparation. To give an inspirational presentation, you need to find your inspiration. Get yourself energized by watching great presenters whenever you can. TED.com is a fantastic source of inspiration. I hope everybody out there knows TED.com. I really recommend it highly. You can also find inspiration by reviewing the literature on your topic. Even if you're an expert on your subject matter, it never fails to stimulate ideas that you've long forgotten or new ones that'll make a difference in your speech. And don't be shy about quoting the gurus of your field in your presentations. Their words add legitimacy to your presentation and help you become inspirational in your own right. Spend some introspective time as you prepare. Gather your thoughts about the topic by scribbling on scrap paper or sticky notes to get started. Give yourself plenty of time to prepare. Weeks of preparation are way better than days. Months are better than weeks. Jot down your ideas and inspirations as they manifest themselves. And as you're preparing, you may want to keep a special notebook on hand or use an app like Evernote or OneNote to keep your ideas together. Then weave your ideas together into a detailed storyboard or an outline. And next, the fun part begins, to me, production. You convert your outline then into a series of detailed notes, or do like I do and write out a detailed script. Refine and edit your script so it flows well and keeps you within your time allocation. If you're doing a PowerPoint or a Prezi, gather your visuals together and put it all together at that point. And make sure you proofread the presentation carefully and then have somebody else proofread it too. There's nothing like a typo to undercut your authority with the audience. The last step of preparation is to rehearse, rehearse, rehearse. Memorize your script as much as you can, or at the very least become so familiar with the layout of your written script that you can maintain frequent eye contact with the audience without losing your pace, fumbling with pages. Ideally, you'll practice in a nice, quiet room where you won't feel self-conscious. Use the stopwatches, and I said before, try to run short. Nobody likes mic hog, and once you get into your zone during your talk, it's very easy to lose track of time. A mirror is nice to practice gestures and expressions. I like to practice in front of my dog, who sometimes gives me very good advice. If you're part of a panel at the NEMA conference, I really encourage you also to schedule a live rehearsal with your fellow panelists prior to the presentation. At the very least, set up a web conference to rehearse before the big day. Okay, let's move on to content, shall we? The best presentations achieve a harmonic resonance between presenter and audience, a balance between what the audience wants to learn and what the presenter can teach. Eastern religion refers to this as the yin and yang, and we Westerners call it the unity of form and function. Now, let me talk for a minute about presentations that usually do not achieve harmonic resonance, the dreaded show and tell. How many of us enjoy being on the receiving end of show and tells? Right? They're typically one-sided, boring affairs where the speaker is stoking his or her ego by going on and on about their favorite subject themselves. Well, now this might be a little unfair. Many speakers at the NEMA conference and elsewhere give show and tells without even realizing it. They're not bad, egotistical people. They're just not great speakers. Unless you've just found the cure for cancer, avoid straight show and tell presentations. Put your experience in the form of a case study and give your case study a message. Ask yourself, why do people care what I have to say? Make it relevant to them, not an advertisement for you. Your presentation should be structured with a beginning, a middle, and an end. This is the classic rhetorical structure. Think of your presentation as a story. Make it relevant so that your story becomes their story. In the classic structure, ideas build on one another to create a memorable conclusion. Your structural framework is your roadmap. It's important to adhere to a structure so both you and your audience know where you are, where you're going, and not feel lost in the woods. That's why it's important in some ways to think about it when you tell your audience at the very beginning of your speech what you're going to say, then you go ahead and say it, and at the end you tell them what you've said to reinforce what it is. That's part of the classical structure. The best presentations have a memorable start. As the saying goes, you only have one shot to make a good first impression, and the same applies for presentations. You should seek to grab your audience by the lapels, figuratively speaking, and make sure they're awake and paying attention to you. You might do this by raising a provocative question or doing a poll like we just did at the beginning of our presentation today. You might do this by telling a story or showing an interesting object. You might do this by demonstrating something germane to your talk. Whatever you do, go for a bit of drama or interactivity that sets the stage for the rest of your time on the stage. Part of your beginning should be an introduction to establish your credentials. Let your audience know why you're an expert on the subject you're about to cover. Unless you're a celebrity, don't assume your audience knows anything about you. And don't worry too much about bragging, within reason, of course. Your audience will feel better about your talk if they know you're qualified to give it. The body of your presentation should seek to deliver a handful of memorable, sticky ideas that your audience will remember forever. These key sticky ideas are the matrix around which you organize the presentation. Ideally, you won't have any more than 3 or 4 key ideas in your presentation. Any more than that, and your audience might get information overload. Sticky ideas are the essence of simplicity, and simplicity works to create a memorable presentation. So here's a quick history lesson. Anybody know who this guy is? In 1863, he was the country's leading orator, Harvard President Edward Everett. After the Battle of Gettysburg, Everett was asked to deliver a speech dedicating the federal cemetery there. He spoke for more than 2 hours, but does anyone remember what he said? Not really. But everyone remembers what this guy said. Lincoln was a last-minute addition to the speaking program and followed Everett's 2-hour speech with 407 years ago, and so on, for 2 minutes of one of the most powerful orations ever delivered, the Gettysburg Address. 2 minutes versus 2 hours. Lincoln was very simple and elegant. The point is that sticky ideas are the essence of simplicity and vice versa. Interject some personal stories into your presentation whenever relevant. The audience really wants to relate to you. And sprinkle quotes liberally throughout your speech. Quotes from experts reinforce your conclusions. In the old days, you had to thumb through Bartlett's book of quotations and try to find something good, but today quotes are very easy to come by on sites like Quotes Daddy and Speech Guru and Bartleby.com, which is the online version of good old Bartlett's. So speaking of quotes, we've got a couple of my favorites here. I just can't help but interject. So who said this? Free speech means the right to shout theater in a crowded fire. Well, the answer is Worcester's own Abby Hoffman. How about this one? If you could kick the person in the pants responsible for most of your trouble, you wouldn't sit for a month. Teddy Roosevelt. And last but not least, how about this one? I intend to live forever or die trying. And that, of course, is good old Groucho Marx. So use quotes whenever you can. They add a little levity and influence to your speech. Another effective technique for your content is to use suspense in appropriate ways. Use suspense not to scare your audience away, but to keep them on the edge of their seats until the end of your performance. A good way to do this is to promise a surprise or a reward at the conclusion of your presentation to keep them anticipating. So to create a little suspense in our Lunch with NEMA talk today, I'd like you all to take a poll that reveals your hidden demons. What part of public speaking freaks you out the most? So I'm going to ask you now to pick your favorite anxiety, and we'll reveal the results at the end of my talk. So we're going to go back to this, and we've got our second survey. And there we go. What aspect of public speaking freaks you out the most? There we go. Start voting, folks. Appearing dumb, standing in the spotlight, fielding tough audience questions, forgetting my lines, losing my place, or nothing freaks me out. Go ahead and take your poll there. Keep going, keep going. Nothing freaks me out. Not many people. No freakouts so far. All right. So now we're going to end the voting. Thank you all so very much for doing that. We're going to share the results later. And we're going to go back to the program. So there's Suspense. But before we leave the subject of content, we absolutely have to spend a few minutes talking about PowerPoint. Now, like everything else in our tech-crazed society, PowerPoint has become both a blessing and a curse for presentations. Used well, programs like PowerPoint and its cousins have enabled good presenters to make really great presentations, utilizing graphics and video and audio and special effects to add interest to their words. But put into the wrong hands, PowerPoint is a disaster waiting to happen. That's because everybody thinks they're a designer. They take advantage of every wild font on their computer, all the clip art they can stuff into their slide, and enough crazy effects to give you motion sickness. Or they basically copy the text they wrote in their word processing program and cram it all into their slides. Then they compound their crime by reading from the slides. The audience kind of rolls their eyes and says, God, can I just have the handout so I can read it at home? Many PowerPoint abusers are data-driven, putting so much data on a slide it makes you want to drive right off a cliff. I mean, how can you ever read a slide like that? Look at that, and the amount of time it takes you weeks. So don't fall into the PowerPoint trap of thinking your presentation needs whiz-bang software to be successful. Don't use PowerPoint as a crutch to compensate for your lack of expertise or preparation. The audience just isn't dumb. They won't buy it. Besides, just imagine if you have a technical glitch. Go on with the show without the technology? You have to ask yourself that. If you're going to use PowerPoint, use it responsibly. Simple is better. Don't cram too much information on the slide. Illustrate your data with interesting graphics instead of stale charts or graphs. This is a good one from our friends at Reach Advisors. Note how they make it's very simple to read graphic, and they use graphics, not a chart, the little houses there representing numbers, which is terrific. Use very simple, high-impact images whenever possible to illustrate your point. And you can be whimsical if that fits your personality. Here are a few slides from Nina Simon, the director of the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and author of the Participatory Museum. A lot of you know Nina as a great presenter who has a loose, effective style of presentation, aided by slides that reflect her sense of humor. So these are particularly good ways of being whimsical, I think. And if you want to provide your audience with handouts based on your slides, distribute them after your presentation and not before. Nothing is more distracting to the presenter or boring to the audience as allowing everyone to preview your remarks. Better yet, go green by offering your audience handouts online. Get their business cards and send them after your session is over. This year at the NEMA conference, we're encouraging all of our speakers to provide us with an electronic version of their handouts for our Handouts online service, which we'll post to the NEMA website and our conference mobile app, so people can actually be reading them on their mobile apps at your session. Okay, we're in the home stretch now. Let's talk about how to deliver your presentation. First of all, I think it's very important to set the tone of your presentation before you even say a word. As the audience enters the room, I usually greet them at the door in a establish a one-on-one rapport with as many as possible, which tends to center me mentally and give me a sense of my audience. I like it when the room is set up with round tables instead of theater style. Tables get people talking with one another, which ramps up their energy level and attention. Also, I like to play upbeat music just before starting. It's sort of like when the band does the lead in to Letterman or Leno or something. It gets the whole room energized, so playing music is sometimes a good technique. Okay, so now it's showtime. You're about to go on stage, and no matter how often you do this, you will have the jitters. The comedian George Jessel once said, "The human brain starts working the moment you're born and never stops until you stand up and speak in public." So there's one thing you got to remember. Butterflies in your stomach before you start talking are normal, but heart palpitations not so much. You want to know how to avoid becoming freaked out when the curtain parts. So a couple of suggestions here. First of all, hopefully you've remembered to rehearse like crazy. You become more relaxed as you master your presentation. Before you go on stage, visualize yourself giving the perfect speech. See yourself from the audience's vantage point. Picture yourself as cool and confident. Listen to the wild applause as you finish. If you're still feeling nervous, just say to hell with it. What am I scared of? The audience isn't there to judge you. They're there to learn from you. Remember to smile. Try to have fun. Get caught up in the moment. Smiles loosen you up and make you more sympathetic to the audience. If needed, give yourself some cues to slow down and breathe. Sipping water, for example, is better than stammering. I'll never forget one of my first public presentations. My hands were clammy. I felt like I was sweating all over. I was talking, sure enough, but I was having one of these out-of-body experiences, kind of watching myself stumble all over my words. All of a sudden, I just stopped talking. The words wouldn't come out. I was having one of those full-blown deer-in-the-headlights panic attacks. Luckily, one of my more experienced panel mates recognized what was going on and handed me a bottle of water. I took a drink, and I took a breath, and I was good to go. It was a valuable experience. Remember, you're there on stage because you have a compelling story that no one else can tell. You're the expert on your story, and no one in the room knows more about your story than you do. Jazz man Miles Davis once said, "Don't fear mistakes. There are none." In jazz, there are no rules, just guidelines and traditions. And the same is the case with presentations, I think. As long as it swings, it's going to be good. Learn to love the microphone and all the other technological gadgets that will help you deliver a smooth presentation. Unless you're talking to a small group in a small room, always use the mic. I'm going to say it again. Always use the mic. And if you're being recorded, use the mic even if you're in a small room. I don't know how many times I've seen speakers think they're relating to the audience better by stepping away from the microphone and talking from the front of the stage as though they're creating intimacy. Don't do it. Resist the temptation. Inevitably, no one except for a handful of people can hear you. You may not like using a mic, but it isn't about your preference. It's about serving your audience and allowing them to hear you properly. Ideally, you'd have a wireless lavalier mic to allow you mobility on the stage, but a handheld is okay too. I really hate standing behind a podium typically, so I usually take the mic off the stand and walk around. Remember to test the mic when the room is empty to gauge how far away from the mic your mouth should be, so you're not popping your P's and so forth. And during the Q&A portion of your presentation, remember to repeat the audience questions if there's no floor mic. Obviously, nobody in the audience can hear what's going on, so you can repeat those questions. I use a remote to advance my slides, so I don't have to keep running back and forth to the laptop and distract my audience. You can buy these things for 30 bucks or so at Staples, and I think they're worth every penny. Double check your hookups prior to game time. I always arrive an hour beforehand to set up and check out the AV. No offense to the AV technicians, but I never trust them. They're not the ones who will look stupid when the technology doesn't work. And don't forget to double check the version of PowerPoint on the laptop you're using, that make sure it matches the version you use to create the presentations. Lots of your effects and fonts won't work if you're using an early version for the playback. That's a lesson I learned the hard way a few times. Make sure you check the room lighting. It should be dark enough in the room for people to see your slides, but bright enough so that they can take notes and keep from falling asleep. Also check the stage lighting to make sure that you're not in the shadows wherever you're speaking. Make sure you stay in the lighting itself so folks can see you. And unless you're Madonna, never turn your back to the audience. If you need to keep track of your visuals, glance periodically at your laptop as you're advancing your slides, never at the screen behind you. And keep your notes or outline handy near your laptop just in case you need to refresh your memory. Don't be afraid to show some passion in your delivery to engage the audience. Feel free to move around the stage during the presentation, but just don't pace like a caged animal. And don't wander around in front of your PowerPoint and wind up looking like a science fiction villain. This is very distracting to the audience and definitely not very flattering to you. Really, you can be as theatrical as you want during your presentation as long as it fits your personality and does not really distract from the content of your message. As I said earlier, your goal is to leave the audience with a handful of sticky ideas, and sometimes you need a little pizzazz to make them stick. Visual aids are very effective ways to emphasize these sticky ideas. Your PowerPoint, of course, is your chief visual aid if you're using one, but freestanding charts and posters are also very effective since they provide your audience with some visual diversity. Some speakers use really unique visual aids, which makes their talk extremely memorable. Here's Chef Jamie Oliver using a wheelbarrow full of sugar cubes to illustrate how much sugar kids ingest from school milk in just 5 years. It's a terrific one. One of my favorite ones is visual aids from a TED Talk by Dr. Jill Taylor Bolte, a neuroscientist who actually used a human brain to illustrate her point. This talk was one of the most popular TED Talks of all time. As a museum professional, you theoretically have access to all sorts of evocative visual aids for presentations, your collection. Of course, you have to take proper care of any objects you use, but there's something inherently dramatic when you put on your white gloves and display a historic artifact or a work of art to the audience. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, an object is worth 1,000,000. The point is to engage your audience with a balance of words, visuals, gestures, and most important, those sticky ideas that they'll remember forever. So that's the end of our presentation, and I know you've been dying to discover the results of our poll regarding the part of public speaking that freaks us out the most. And I've been deliberately keeping you in suspense so that you'd stay with me till the very end. And look at this. You're still with me. So here are the results. We're going to go back to here we go, in the survey, and I'm going to share the results with everybody, and there we go. So the results are: what aspect of public speaking freaks you out the most? 20% appearing dumb, that's a good one. Standing in the spotlight, not so much. Fielding tough audience questions, always a tough one. Forgetting my lines or losing my place, 28%. And nothing, well, that's good to see. We've all considering ourselves, we've got room for improvement. So there we go. All right, so excellent job. So one last slide for us here. So I hope you all agree that we've learned a lot during our little lunch date. We've talked about how to prepare for a presentation. We've learned how to develop content for your talks. We've delved into the ways to deliver your presentation that'll keep the audience engaged and clamoring for more. Most important, I hope we've provided you with a valuable tool that you can continue to use for the rest of your life to do your job better and move your career to be the best it can be. I encourage you all to get as much practice as you possibly can. Seek out opportunities to speak whenever you can in staff meetings, board meetings, and maybe in more formal settings. Some of you are speaking at the NEMA conference, which is great practice, and I thank you again for doing that. And if you're not in a conference session this year, you can still get in some practice in Newport by giving a PK presentation on Tuesday, November 12th. So that's my pitch for the conference and for getting out there. Thanks for being such a great audience today. And now let's see what kind of questions you have. BJ and Sarah, do you have anything for us? Any questions there, guys?
Okay, Dan, we did get a question. I agree that complex animated PowerPoints are often a mess. How do you feel about Prezi presentations?
Well, I got to say, Prezi presentations are the next frontier for me. The first time I ever saw it, I was so impressed with it. I didn't even know what it was at that point because, and I'm hoping everybody does know, Prezi, P-R-E-Z-I, look it up, Prezi.com. It's kind of the next generation. It's a very cinematic way of presenting where basically you don't have slides, but you are running through a visual map of your presentation. It zooms and pans and so forth. It's very exciting. I do not know how to use it except for fooling around with it. So that's what I'm starting to practice. And as I said, the next presentation, I might, if I get the time, be able to do something at the conference. I'm hoping so, but I think it's really terrific. The one thing that I have heard about Prezis is that sometimes it is so cinematic, it is so awe-inspiring, the journey that you take people on, that they sort of forget what it is that you're saying, and they're so focused on the graphics that it can be a bit distracting. And you have to be very careful about how you do use it in terms of the zooms and the pans and the loops and so forth, because it actually, I've also heard that it can make people literally seasick when they're watching it. So you have to be careful. But it is very, very cool.
Dan, I have another question from Barbara Palmer. Any tips for roundtable discussions? How to get audience participation? Does every table need a facilitator?
That's a great question, Barbara. Well, with roundtables, I think that the real great thing there is that you've got a number of different topics that people select and talk about. I think that it definitely helps to have a facilitator for each table because people, tend to focus on the discussion that somebody can kind of pull them along. However, I've seen it happen where the roundtables don't have a planned facilitator, but always somebody ends up rising to the occasion and becomes the sort of ad hoc leader with it. So you can get, if you don't have enough people to go around for all of your topics, you can certainly get away with it, but make sure that you've got a very clear discussion topic on the table and sort of an idea for what the outcomes should be. But it's a great way to get your audience revved up and actively participating as opposed to the old panel discussion. Any other thoughts, questions, whatever?
Dan, it looks like a couple of people are typing now.
Okay. These things are always funny. Don't be shy now, folks. Don't be shy. It is a very different
NEMA
experience. Yeah.
Oh, hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, this is BJ again. Brian asked, can NEMA presenters request roundtables versus rows? And I can probably answer that as well as Dan can. The answer is yes, but we cannot always honor those requests because we have to work very closely with the hotel to minimize the number of times that rooms need to be flipped during a given day. But I do receive those requests from the chairs, and I try to honor them as best I can.
I think also the AV needs is another thing to sort of throw in, Beej, as a pitch for making sure that your speakers, all the speakers on your panels, really know what's available and make sure that they communicate that with BJ as soon as they possibly can, or you need to communicate it if you're the session chair directly with BJ. Is that right, BJ? Because we want to make sure that we've got the right technology in each of the rooms beforehand.
Yes, that's true. And someone was asking me that on the chat feature earlier, and I was saying that the speakers should, if they haven't already, check in with their chairs to see what, the chairs have already made their AV requests to me, but it's not too late. So if there's anything unusual or if you needed to add something, you should definitely double check with your chair and see what they requested as far as AV goes.
while everybody is continuing to think of questions, I'm going to put up a little presentation resources guide. And incidentally, we're going to have, I'll have the presentation will be recorded, as I said, and we'll also include this guide up on the website as well as presentation resources so that you can get a sense of some of the websites and so forth that I recommend. As I mentioned, TED.com, great inspiration for your talks. PresentationZen.com is another terrific one. This guy named Gar Reynolds, who's a professional speaker, has a lot to recommend. GarReynolds.com, Walking Paper, so forth. So anyway, you have some inspirations for your talks. Quotation sources I put down there so you can use that. PowerPoint templates, those are a little, you have to take these with a grain of salt sometimes, but these are, for the most part, at least where you can go to get some interesting templates. And then, of course, my contact info for general advice and encouragement. I mean this sincerely. Anybody that's really into public speaking, I'm always happy to help out. Not that I'm, the last word on any of this, but I have had a good deal of experience. And if you want to just chat about it and whatever, I'm always available to talk with you about it. So give me a holler.
More question from Sharon Reed.
Yeah, it's a great one. That happens
what
quite
is
a bit.
the best
I think
way to have
the most straightforward thing, of course, is that, and we've all been there if we've given presentations. What's the, somebody stumps you with a question. Well, you have a couple of options. One, you sort of fake it and make something up because you are the expert, presumably, and what do they know? But that always comes back to haunt you. I always like the come up and see me after the presentation so that we can maybe understand your question a little bit better, kind of thing, and be talking with folks after the presentation informally. And then, of course, always get their business cards or contact information so that you can get back to them with whatever question they might have. And I think it's important, obviously, to remind you to, in fact, get back to people. I've done that a few times where I've totally blown it and forgotten, and you feel terrible. Some people have reminded me. I'm seeing Barbara here. I'm looking at the chat. I suggested handing out so this is one of the tough audience questions, I guess, right, Barbara? You suggested not handing out presentations in advance, but I say that it's going to be available online to participants. Will that create a distraction? You're absolutely right. You caught me. I'm suggesting that if you've got the printed handouts, people are ruffling through papers. It's very distracting. And now, though, you're quite right. If it's online on your handheld app, they're going to be perhaps online looking at your handouts. The distraction thing is always going to be there, and it's gotten more intense now with people online because people are very quickly checking out some of the facts that you've given. Perhaps they're checking out some of the websites that you've suggested, those types of things. It's all in a very immediate type of thing. So you do have to be aware of that. But ultimately, yeah, you caught me on that, Barbara, and you have to kind of laugh too. You realize that it is very distracting, especially if you're up front with people. You're seeing people in the front row of the audience clicking away, checking out your handouts and so forth. That's tough. But anyway, we figured as an organization it's important for us to go green, and I think that's something that folks have responded to well. I'm seeing a question here from Aaron. Any tips on moving a discussion forward during a...
through from Aaron Trainer.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead there, Sarah. All right, I'll do it. Any tips on moving a discussion forward during a roundtable discussion when someone is speaking too long or going off course? Well, this is a close cousin to what I was talking about, the session chair needing to wield a stopwatch and so forth. I think it is very important for whoever is facilitating roundtable discussion or facilitating the panel to really, really enforce time guidelines if you're actually being timed, or making sure that if somebody is asking a question or discussing something as part of follow-up, that they do not overstep their bounds. And this happens a lot. I'm sure we've all seen that, where somebody asking a question that takes 5 minutes, they're actually, they love to hear themselves talk. And you need to be respectful, but you also need to realize that you need to be respectful to the listeners as well. And when you let somebody go on and on and on too long, it's being disrespectful to the listeners. Or in the case of a panel discussion, if you let one of your panelists go 10 minutes over their allotted time, that means that the other panelists are going to have that much less time to deliver their remarks, and they've prepared just as much or maybe more than the other person. So, if it's a matter of hurting somebody's feelings because you're telling them to hush up, I think it's important to go ahead and do that. But very often, too, the person that's doing the talking doesn't fully realize it, because, as I said, once you get into the zone of talking, and even if just extemporaneous talking, you lose track of time and you don't really recognize that you've gone either over your allotted time or you're just being a mic hog. And it's sometimes folks really view it as a blessing when the facilitator says, yeah, you need to stop. So, with that, BJ, Sarah, I guess if there are no other questions, we can go into the commercial for the next Lunch with NEMA, if you like.
Hi, yeah, this is BJ again. On October 30th, our next Lunch with NEMA is going to be on websites and accessibility, and it will be led by Nora Nagel, and she is the accessibility coordinator at the Museum of Science. And it is not a high-tech discussion of and very simple solutions to keeping your website accessible. Thanks for attending, everybody.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Appreciate it. See you at the NEMA conference in November.